Hello Nintendo Wii here, and welcome back to Let's Play Retro Games, and welcome to part 2 of my Game Boy collection. I really hope you enjoyed part 1, so let's start this video here by taking a look at a few games I picked up from Entertainment World in Birmingham. A few more Game Boy games. So first of all, we have Tennis for the Game Boy, complete in box, really nice condition, and there's the card as well. I used to have this game many years ago, but for whatever reason I don't have it anymore, so I'm really glad to have this again. It's really fun, it's one of the very early Game Boy games, so it is quite simple, but I do love the simplistic games on the original Game Boy, so very happy to have this one. I got this one from a shop called GameSmart. They have a Twitter page as well, so go and follow both the shops, I'll put the links up there. Really cool guys. They're the guys that had Mega Man 6 on the NES, which I really need to get at some point, but I didn't have the money when I was there this time, but it's still there, so maybe one day. Anyway, R-Type is a fantastic game on the Game Boy. I have R-Type Deluxe in the cabinet, which is the Game Boy Color version, but I never actually owned the original, so I'm very happy to have that. And a few more loose Game Boy games that I picked up from Entertainment World as well. So the first one here, a game that for some reason I don't have on the Game Boy, so very happy to have this one. This is Marble Madness, one of my favourite games on the NES. Really happy to have the original Game Boy version of it. And I know my friend Zach really loves that game, so there you go, Marble Madness. The next one here, I'd never even heard of this one, but it's actually a really fun game. I was very impressed by it. It's called Mr. Nuts, and it turns out there was actually a Game Boy Color version released as well. This is the original black and white version. As far as I know, the games are the same, so really happy to have this to add to my original Game Boy collection. The next one here, a game that was very popular on 16 and 32-bit consoles back in the early 90s. This one is called Zool, or Zool Ninja of the Nth Dimension. Really fun, fast-paced platformer. I think this is one of the very first games that actually had the ability to wall jump, which is kind of cool, so a neat little game there. I'd love to play the original at some point. I know it was on a lot of systems back in the day. And the last one we have here, I can't remember what it's called. It's a Japanese game. I picked it up, had no idea what it was, just took a gamble really, but it's quite fun. It's basically sort of like a mix of Dig Dug and the original Game Boy game Heian-kyo Alien, I presume I pronounced that right. A game that I don't have, but a very famous game. Go and watch Jeremy Parrish's Game Boy World video on it and it'll fill you in on all the details, but very fun game nonetheless. So that was the games that I picked up recently for my Game Boy collection. Now it's time to take a look at the second half of the games in the display cabinet. So thank you very much for watching so far, please enjoy. So the next original Game Boy one we have here, for some reason it's missing its label, but I don't know if you can read that there. It's actually Revenge of the Gator. Another great pinball game that plays a lot like Kirby's Pinball, but for some reason has alligators. And it's also made by HAL, the same people who made Kirby, so you can kind of see where it came from, but I have no idea why they chose alligators. Now this one is Parodius, one of my all-time favourite game series. I was really curious to see how the Game Boy version compares to the console ones, and I have to say it compares very favourably. It's really impressive what they managed to get out of the 8-bit Game Boy once again. It holds up really well today as well. A game that doesn't hold up so well today, Castlevania The Adventure, or the Castlevania Adventure. Really, really not great. It's very slow, very clunky, and it just doesn't play very well at all. But a game that does play very well, and probably the most improved sequel out of all of these compared to the original game, Castlevania 2 Belmont's Revenge. This one is really incredible. The soundtrack alone is worth it to get this game, just to hear the incredible soundtrack. But the gameplay as well is much improved over the original. Unfortunately I don't have the third Castlevania game for the Game Boy, but it's one that I am looking to get fairly soon. Hopefully I'll find it at the Retro Market in October. And next to that we have Starhawk, which is probably the most hard to find game out of all of these that I've got here. I actually did a review of it a few weeks ago on my channel, so I'll link to that in the description and you can go and watch it. Really recommend it if you like shooting games and you've got a bit of cash to spare because it is fairly expensive. And Boulder Dash, an absolute classic game. I think it started on the Commodore 64 or something, but the Game Boy port is really good. And then we have Bubble Bobble 2 and Bubble Bobble 1. As I said at the start, Bubble Bobble 2 is one of my all-time favourite games, not just on the Game Boy but any system. And Bubble Bobble 1 is a more basic version. The sprites aren't quite as good and the gameplay is not quite as smooth, but I'd really recommend both of these games. And if you've never played any Bubble Bobble before, you really need to go and give it a go because they're so much fun. And yet another puzzle game on the Game Boy. This one's called Tesserae, and it's kind of confusing. It kind of reminds me of something like Mahjong, but doesn't really explain itself very well. And now Donkey Kong, or Donkey Kong 94 as it's known, is one of the best games in the whole Donkey Kong series. I absolutely love this game, and if you play it on the Super Game Boy you actually get a really cool border which is actually a replica of the Donkey Kong arcade cabinet. If you haven't played it already, definitely recommend going and get this one. It's so much better than the arcade Donkey Kong game, it's crazy. And next to that, a game that's not so exciting is F1 Race. It's just a really basic Formula 1 game. Now the next game here is called Flipple or Flypull, and this was actually one of the games that I used to take in that box to Nan's, but I didn't actually have the original game. I actually had it on one of those sort of 32-in-1 fake cartridge things, and that was just one of the many games on the collection. And the same with the Dragon Warrior game underneath, but I'll get to that in the Game Boy Color video. Flippull's a really fun puzzle game, and I definitely recommend it. It's fairly basic, but it is enjoyable. Next there we have Race Days, which is a very basic racing game. I don't really have too much to say about this one. And then Boxall, which is one of the very first Game Boy games ever released, and it is kind of addictive. That's another one of my original games there, and I really did have a lot of fun with it back in the day. And the same with Metroid 2 as well. I was really impressed by the atmosphere in Metroid 2, and just how close it is to the NES game. In some ways I actually prefer Metroid 2 on the Game Boy to the original. And there we have Solomon's Club, which is a really fun puzzle platformer. I really like the Solomon's Quest game on the NES, and I think they did a really good job of translating it to the Game Boy. And then Motocross Maniacs. I was a huge fan of Excite Bike growing up, and this game kind of captures the same sort of feeling as Excite Bike, but it is a lot harder after you get past the first few stages, so I find this one kind of frustrating, but it's still a good game. And Sneaky Snakes, a game by Rare, published by Tradewest. This is basically a 2D platforming Game Boy version of the NES game Snake Rattle and Roll, which is actually one of my favourite NES games, and this version is a lot of fun, although I wouldn't say it's as good as that, but the animation's still really clear and smooth, and it is quite a fun game. And Wave Race, another one of the original games that I used to have back in the day. It doesn't really hold up too well today. If you're going to play a Wave Race game, I'd really recommend the N64 one over the Game Boy one. And there we have Puyo Puyo. I really love the Puyo Puyo series in general, but this one is as basic as they come, really. And I don't really enjoy playing it too much on the black and white screen, just because playing Puyo Puyo in colour is a lot easier, just because it's easier to match them up. And there we have Final Fantasy Adventure, not to be confused with Final Fantasy Legend, the game I was talking about earlier. This one's actually the prequel to Secret of Mana, and I think in Japan it was actually part of the Mana series, but they rebranded it over here. It's really good. It's actually one of my favourite games on the original Game Boy. And I'll just mention this game here because this is the game that I actually played Flypull and Dr. Mario and all those sort of games on there. I think Boxall was on it as well. And this is the game that I actually used to take with me after school to play all them games on. Yeah, legit, as you can see. And next there is Resident Evil for the Game Boy. I was really disappointed because I thought it was the unreleased Resident Evil prototype, but it actually turned out to be Resident Evil Gaiden. So, bit of a shame. Now the next one down here, we have Tiny Toon, one of the Tiny Toon games. I can't really remember much about this one. Someone at work gave it to me a while ago. I just turned up at work one day and it was just sat there on my desk. And there next to that there's The Frog for Whom the Bell Tolls, the one I was talking about earlier when I showed the box. Really cool game, like I said, made by the same team that went on to make Zelda Link's Awakening. And there's Mario's Picross as well. And next there we have Dino Blaster, which is part of the Bomberman series, I think. I can't really remember too much about this game, but I might go and play it and put a bit of gameplay to the side there. And there's Bubble Ghost, which is a really, really interesting little puzzle. I wouldn't really call it a platformer. More of a puzzle game where you play as a little ghost and you have to blow things around. It's quite fun. And there we have the Pokemon games Red, Blue and Yellow. Of course, I was a huge fan of Pokemon growing up, as I'm sure a lot of you were. really enjoy the games. For some reason I seem to have lost Gold, Silver and Crystal, so I can't show those ones, but there's the original 3, and they are my original 3 games as well. And next to them we have the other yellow cartridges, which when Pokemon Yellow came out, if you were playing one of the Donkey Kong Land games, people thought you were playing Pokemon Yellow, even though you're playing Donkey Kong. They're really good conversions of the SNES games, but they're not the best, especially if you play them on the original Game Boy. It's really hard to see what's going on. And surprisingly, in Japan, there was a different version of Donkey Kong Land 3 which actually had colour, which was never released outside of Japan. So that's just a cool little interesting thing there, but I definitely recommend them if you're playing on anything other than the original Game Boy. And now coming down to the bottom few rows here, the next one we have is Double Dragon 2, a fairly basic port of the NES game Double Dragon. It doesn't really play that well, and to be honest I don't really enjoy it that much, but never mind. Now a game I do enjoy quite a lot, this one is Kicks, or Quicks. This one's one of the earliest arcade games ever actually, and the Game Boy conversion, while basic, is still quite good. There was also a much improved Game Boy Color version which sort of includes an adventure mode as well, which I'll show you in part 2. And Alleyway, one of the very first games that ever came out on the Game Boy, and I suppose Radar Mission next to it. These two are as basic as they come. Alleyway is basically just Nintendo's version of Breakout, and Radar Mission, even more basic, is just battleships. So both of these games are kind of fun just to see some of the origins of the Game Boy, but don't expect anything too in-depth with these ones. A game that is a lot more in-depth, Lemmings, and Worms I suppose as well, we can lump these together because they're both by Ocean. Lemmings plays really well on the Game Boy, and so does Worms. It's really impressive how they managed to sort of port the games onto something with the screen resolution a lot lower than what you'd expect to be playing these games on. So well done to the developers for making these two games in the first place. And Space Invaders, which is a really great port of the arcade Space Invaders game, but the best way to enjoy this one is on the SNES. As you can see there, it says it's Super Game Boy compatible, but this is actually the only game that actually gives you the option to play an entire SNES game on the actual SNES through the Game Boy, which is really interesting. And next there we have Chase HQ, a Taito classic, really fun arcade style racing game. And Gremlins 2, I can't really remember a lot about this one, but it's made by Sunsoft, so it must be fairly good. And can't really remember what that one is, it might be Kid Dracula. I picked that one up at a trade-in post many years ago. I just got kind of excited because it was a Japanese Game Boy game. I should probably go back and give it another try. And at the end there we have the original Star Wars on the Game Boy, which isn't very good in my opinion. The controls and the graphics, and it just doesn't really explain what to do very well. Now we're nearing the end now, only one more row. The next game we have here is Disney's Mulan, which to be honest I think is really, really bad. The controls are terrible and it just doesn't explain itself very well, like a few of the Game Boy games seem to do. The next one there is Track Meet, which is just a really basic track and field sort of game. There was actually Track and Field released on the Game Boy as well, which I want to get at some point. And then we have A Boy and His Blob, or to give it its full title, David Crane's The Rescue of Princess Blobette, A Boy and His Blob. Probably the longest titled Game Boy game out of all of them. The game itself plays fairly well, it's a fairly competent conversion of the NES game, but quite a lot more basic as well, and the areas that you can explore aren't quite as big as the NES game. And then we have Hyper Load Runner, which is insanely difficult for what it is. I used to really love Load Runner on the NES and I was very disappointed by the Game Boy one. It is really, really difficult. And then we have Tasmania, just another cartoon tie-in platformer. And next to that we have DuckTales, which of course, the NES game DuckTales is one of the best games on the entire system, and Capcom really pumped out some amazing Disney licensed games. And the Game Boy version sort of lives up to that as well, it's really good. Very impressive. And then we have Buster Move 3 DX. If you've never played any of the Buster Move games before, they are really, really fun. They also came out over here before that as Puzzle Bubble, so you might know it by that name instead. And there's an interesting game. This one's called Burai Fighter Deluxe. This is one of my favourite games actually. It's sort of a sideward scrolling shooting game, but you play sort of like Space Harrier as a guy floating around holding a gun, and it's just quite fun overall. And then we have one of many Simpsons games on the Game Boy. Don't really have much to say about this one, it's fairly basic. And next to that we have Adventure Island 2, which is a really good port of the Adventure Island games for the NES and other systems. Plays really well on the Game Boy, so that's a really good one. And at the end there, kind of hard to see, we have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, or in the UK's case, Teenage Hero Turtles, Fall of the Foot Clan. And to be honest, it's not a very good game. There's much better Turtles games on the Game Boy. And the last game we have here, and to end on a kind of bad note, this is Hook, which I really don't think is very good at all. So, I really hope you enjoyed that look through my entire original Game Boy games collection. As always, don't forget to comment, let me know some of your favourite Game Boy games down below. Check out my Patreon, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'm very excited because next weekend I'm going to MCM Glasgow, so stay tuned next week where you can see all my fun games I picked up at that show, and a bit of a vlog as well. So thank you very much for watching, goodbye.